Thanks for joining. We'll get started in about 1 minute. So please be prepared. We'll get started in about 1 minute.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the grand opening Western Hemisphere of the Virtual Island Summit. We have with us a distinguished panel of guests, but I'd like to first introduce myself. My name is Matthew McMillan. I am the president and CEO of BuzzMaker. We're an international public affairs, corporate communications, public relations, and political consultancy that has worked in dozens of islands around the world, primarily in the Caribbean, but also in the Indian Ocean. You can learn more about us at buzzmaker.net. With that said, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. the Honourable Ralph Gonsalves, who is Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the current chairman of the Caribbean community, CARICOM. What more is there to be said about Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves? All that can be said has already been said. When thinking about how to describe him, words like Titan, Leviathan, freedom fighter, and rock come to mind. But alas, mere words do not do justice to Prime Minister Gonsalves. They fail to describe him and his contribution to the Caribbean civilization. He is at present the father of CARICOM, the longest serving prime minister in CARICOM. He is a champion of democracy, a friend to all, but a satellite to none. He is a statesman so respected around the world that his tiny St. Vincent and the Grenadines was the smallest country ever elected to sit on the United Nations Security Council with a 185-6 vote. He has had many loves in his life: his dear wife Eloise, his children, his family. But perhaps his greatest love is the ordinary Vincentian citizen, who he has not met, but who is thriving because of his education revolution and his belief that social democracy provides the framework for the upliftment of ordinary people. I will close this introduction with a quote from the great St. Lucian poet Derek Walcott, who spoke of that true love one must have for the stranger. And I quote, "You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart." Comrade Ralph never forgot the stranger, because he is the stranger who loved the people humbly. I would like to now introduce my friend, Comrade Ralph Gonsalves.
Thank you very much, Matt, and I want to greet all the distinguished ladies and gentlemen on this Virtual Island Summit. And I'm very pleased to be delivering the feature address at this important gathering on the progress towards the achievement of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, in Small Island Developing States, SIDS. And I shall speak especially from the experiences and the standpoint of the island states in the Caribbean. First, permit me to traverse briefly the well-known territory on the SDGs. In September 2015, 193 member states of the United Nations signed on to the 17 SDGs with a universal commitment to achieve them by the year 2030. The SDGs are the successors to the less ambitious but vital Millennium Development Goals, which were adopted by the United Nations in the year 2000 to reduce extreme poverty by 2015. In summary, the SDGs and their multiple consequential targets focus on achieving no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, affordable clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions and partnerships for the goals. I should point out that as Prime Minister, I was one of the signatories to these Sustainable Development Goals. And I go further to say that in the manifesto of the Unity Labour Party, the party which I have the honor to lead, in the general elections, the last ones held in December 2015, the centerpiece of our manifesto was around the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. In a nutshell, as the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs puts it, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development provides a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity, for people and the planet, now and into the future. At its heart are the 17 SDGs, which are an urgent call for action by all countries, developed and developing, in a global partnership. They recognize that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. Achieving the SDGs in small island developing states is particularly problematic given their existing constraints of smallness, small size of landmass, small population, and of course limited natural resources. Because of these factors in small island developing states, it's really very difficult to achieve the SDGs, certainly in the particular time frame. Compounding extraordinarily the developmental constraints of smallness are the debilitating legacies of history. In the Caribbean context, these are colonialism and imperialism, native genocide, the enslavement of Africans, and the indentureship of Madeirans and Indians. And on top of all these shackles to development is the cruel design or evolution of the contemporary global political economy, which inhibits and undermines the developmental thrust and indeed the very viable existence of small island developing states. The SIDS are truly facing threatening vulnerabilities. In the face of the profound limitations occasioned by nature, the debilitating legacies of history, and the harsh contemporary realities of globalization, the way forward for realizing the Sustainable Development Goals in small island developing states is really challenging, even daunting. Indeed, one commentator, the Minister of Finance of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Camilo Gonsalves, encapsulated contemporary burdens of the small island developing states in his brilliant book, Globalized, Climatized, and Stigmatized, published in 2019. And he had this to say: the global arbiters of policy seek to impose an ideological homogeneity through force of law, might, and money. The contradictions and constraints of these policies and practices have caused island states to suffer the unholy trinity of being globalized, climatized, and stigmatized to varying harmful degrees. This trinity of anti-island action has produced some real, cruel, socio-economic paradoxes, including the smallest contributors to climate change are the most affected. The lowest contributors to terrorist financing or banking impropriety are the most constrained. The smallest producers of global goods and services are the most restricted by the rules of international trade. And the most indebted among the least likely to get debt relief or concessional financing. That's Camillo's take on this matter. Still, despite the extant realities of smallness, some awesome historical legacies and the contemporary burdens, SIDS do exist, small island developing states, despite all these challenges. They do exist. Despite all these burdens, they're fighting to survive. They're striving to succeed in viability. And thus far, despite all what I've outlined, all the burdens,
It looks like we have had a technical difficulty. Let's see if we can get, I think if we unmute the Prime Minister now, we can get him back.
I think he's frozen on their side. Unfortunately, it seems like a internet error on their side. We'll do our best to try and get him back. If Matt, you have anything else to say in the meantime, we'll work with his team.
Yes, I have the contact information as well. Let's send this to you.
yes, we're back now.
Oh, perfect. Yes, sir. Our apologies for the technical error.
Yes. I was making the point that despite the extent of smallness, some awesome historical legacies and contemporary burdens, small island developing states actually do exist. And they're fighting to survive, striving to succeed in viability. And thus far, these challenged small island developing states of uniqueness and in numerous cases of prosperity and nobility amidst, of course, ever-present vulnerabilities and existential threats. Across the globe, there are 33 independent small island states that enjoy membership in the United Nations. In these island states dwell collectively 40 million people, producing an aggregate gross domestic product of US $650 billion. In the Caribbean, the bulk of the island states are located either at the very high or high level on the Human Development Index, HDI, of the United Nations. A glaring exception in this regard is Haiti. But measures of per capita GDP, the HDI, mask the vulnerability of island states which have been brought to their metaphoric knees overnight by a Category 5 hurricane, on economic recession in the citadels of capitalism, or a pandemic. Caribbean students in Pennsylvania have made developmental strides by ensuring that our nation's strengths and possibilities are enhanced and our weaknesses and limitations reduced to the fullest extent practicable in all the circumstances. Oftentimes, to cause these limitations to metamorphose into possibilities and the weaknesses into strengths, we have sought to turn setbacks into advances. Through the fever of our history, we have emphasized good governance and participatory democracy, unity and social inclusiveness out of ethnic diversity and class divisions, tolerance in life and living, not hate or sectional divisiveness. Economic space in the global economy for economic growth, job and wealth creation, education and training, science and technology, regional integration, and an efficacious foreign policy of pragmatism, grounded in high principle and mature leadership. In short, we have sought to build a viable island civilization in life, living, production, and reproduction. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, our government has raised aloft the thesis of small island exceptionalism to chart our progress towards achieving optimal development generally and the sustainable development goals in particular. This small island exceptionalism reflects the fact that small island nations are unique, sui generis, of their own special kind. This is not an exceptionalism grounded in great power, vain glory, or some variant of a presumed manifest destiny for perpetual hegemony. Small island exceptionalism is a scientific or factual recognition that small islandness is in itself exceptional, and that the global political economy excludes small islands from any primary consideration in its design. Exceptional, thus, by global neglect, or at least benign neglect. The sui generis nature, character, and history of small islands mean that the economic and political models on offer from the powerful developed countries in North America and Europe, or the developing nation giants of India or China, or the emerging Latin American titans of Brazil or Mexico, or the oil-rich nations of the Middle East, may contain interesting insights or principles for our consideration and possible application, but they do not represent exemplars for our adoption or imitation. Consequently, there has been in the latter half of and into the first 2 decades of the 21st century, a quest by Caribbean intellectuals and policymakers to search for appropriate developmental models. Some have embarked on quixotic adventures to replicate monopoly capitalism or centrally planned economies from elsewhere. The results have been less than satisfactory in material particulars. Others still, such as Arthur Lewis and William Dimas, Lloyd Bess and Norman Girvan, Errol Barrow and Michael Manley, have sought to emphasize this or that aspect of our historical and contemporary condition to hew a more appropriate praxis, theory and practice. These approaches have brought substantial to mixed successes, but still awash with limitations, yet of continued relevance. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, our government over the past 20 or so years have advanced the following 10 foundational elements for the elaboration of practical policies and programs for development. In a summary form, these are as follows: a people-centered vision, a philosophy of social democracy as applied to our specific conditions, a sociocultural framework for the further ennoblement of our Caribbean civilization, good governance, a tripartite economic partnership between the private, cooperative, and state sectors, the quest to build a modern, competitive post-colonial economy which is at once local, national, regional, and global. The central desirable economic outcomes, this economic approach and quest are job creation, wealth creation, a balanced economy of diverse interest, economic pillars, fiscal, monetary, and financial stability, economic inclusiveness and resilience, the 17 SDGs themselves, mature regionalism, and an efficacious foreign policy. These are the 10 foundational elements that our government in St. Vincent and the Grenadines over the past 20 years have been elaborating and implementing through practical policies and programs to assist really within the framework of the international goals posited to implement the Sustainable Development Goals in our own country. So, through this process, much has been achieved thus far through our own efforts and through the assistance from our development partners, and always under the suzerainty of Almighty God and His amazing grace and blessings. These 10 foundational elements and consequential policies and programs are the major domestic underpinnings of small island exceptionalism. But there's an external dimension. The external drive of this exceptionalism is to establish and foster global partnerships in order to achieve the SDGs on the ground. At the heart of this global partnership must be the centrality of the recognition, in theory and practice, that small island nations are exceptional in the global political economy, that small island nations have a special interests and concerns, which must be accorded not merely a special and differential treatment of a discretionary kind, but a juridically grounded space in the multilateral global system. In short, the articulated and practical formulations of a small island exceptionalism must be embedded in international law as real commitments, not optional aspirations of developed or large developing countries. This constitutes this holding aloft and putting all the elements in place of the thesis of small island exceptionalism. This constitutes the centerpiece of the struggle for small states, whether at the UN, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, UNESCO, or any other such multilateral institution touching on the subjects of relevance to the development of states, such as financing for development, the trade in goods and services, climate change, health, housing, peace and security, science and technology, education and training, culture and sports. Our country, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, has been in the front line of the advocacy of a small island exceptionalism. In recent years, St. Vincent and the Grenadines has risen to the presidency of the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, at the UN, and is currently a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. In both cases, our country has been the smallest ever to achieve these elevations. The journey for small island exceptionalism is not easy, but it is a great cause, and great causes have never been won by doubtful men and women. In discussing the unholy trinity of small island developing states being globalized, climatized, and stigmatized, Camillo in his book offers the following perspective on the way forward. Quote, "These paradoxes and systems that produce them pose existential threats to the sustainability of island states. However, today, there is little popular appetite for quixotic quests by small island states to revolutionize or reinvent the global socioeconomic order. Pragmatic reform is the order of the day," unquote. This realistic assessment contains no pessimism. It is not a gateway to lamentations or learned helplessness. On the contrary, serious and sustained intellectual and organized diplomatic and political work are necessary and desirable to achieve the requisite objectives. In the process, engagement and compromise alongside creative resistance and firmness are to be strategic and tactical positions to be embraced. What the small island developing states cannot do is to avoid a serious engagement for a beneficial global partnership. Sulking off is no answer. Being a yard fowl to imperialism is no answer. Putting one's eggs in the baskets of mirages, like the selling of passports and citizenship, all that is just demeaning and it's unsustainable. The SDGs are unlikely to attain by 2030, in 10 years' time, without efficacious global partnerships. This is the way forward for small island developing states and the Sustainable Development Goals, especially at a time of heightened political and economic contradictions and tensions globally, of the systemic threats currently to global peace and security, and of course, because of the challenges connected to the COVID-19 pandemic. So, by 2030, in 10 years' time, we expect to make in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and in the islands of the Caribbean much more advances towards the Sustainable Development Goals. But their achievement rests not only on us inside of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the rest of the Caribbean, but rests very much on the kind of global partnerships that we build with the rest of the world so that we can work together to effect the development and to bring about achievement for the Sustainable Development Goals in our island nations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Gonsalves, for your address. We appreciate your time and insight, and I know that all of the fellow participants found it greatly interesting, and thank you very much, sir. Let's, I guess, a virtual applause. Our next speaker is, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Undersecretary General and High Representative for the Least Developed Countries, Landlocked Developing Countries, and Small Island Developing States at the United Nations, Utoikamanu. Since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, the High Representative has led a series of dialogues for vulnerable states of the United Nations, including small island developing states, with the key focus on identifying tangible solutions to minimize the impacts of the pandemic and enabling these countries to build back better. The High Representative hails originally from Tonga. Ladies and gentlemen, I humbly and respectfully introduce High Representative Utoikamanu.
Thank you very much, Matt. Your Excellency, Dr. Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Your Excellency, Irfaan Ali, President of Guyana, Honourable Ministers, distinguished speakers, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege to address this virtual island summit. An impressive range of stakeholders have come together to share expertise and knowledge on island communities at a time where uncertainties, new challenges, and structural transformations call for innovation. As High Representative for the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states, a key role is advocacy. Beyond that, I myself come from an island nation. For all, but especially also the island communities, 2020 has been and continues to be a challenging year like few others have been in our lifetime. Last year, we held a high-level midterm review of the Samoa pathway, which together with the Barbados Program of Action and the Mauritius Strategy for Implementation are blueprints for achieving a sustainable development of small island developing states. What became evident is that while some tangible progress has been made over the past 5 years, major gaps and challenges remain. I call it us having a glass half full. The gaps and challenges in themselves pointed once more to the unique vulnerabilities of SIDS caused by both endogenous and exogenous factors. The SIDS continue to grapple with their lasting structural constraints in their efforts to mobilize domestic resources for sustainable development. The resources needed to address poverty and social inclusion, to remedy persistent challenges around food security and nutrition, health and non-communicable diseases, violence against women, youth unemployment and inequality just are not there or not sufficient. SIDS continue to face increasing and more frequent exogenous challenges, ranging from the adverse impacts of climate change to exogenous economic and financial shocks. To make the situation even more complex, many SIDS are considered middle or high-income countries, and this limits their access to development financing. Of course, none of us could foresee the unfolding of this year. The COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in a new and additional set of challenges to SIDS while aggravating existing ones. What is now threatened is the hard-won progress in meeting sustainable development goals. Countries now face the challenge to manage an unprecedented state of economic and social affairs. In the immediate, COVID-19 has laid bare the weaknesses of the health sectors in SIDS. It has negatively affected the education sector, especially for the most vulnerable with unequal access to digital technology infrastructure. The pandemic has put tremendous pressure on already very limited social protection systems. It has triggered large-scale unemployment, which, like everywhere else, disproportionately affects the poor and the vulnerable. Over the past few months, SIDS have experienced an exceptional decline in economic activity. A key employer and income earner is tourism. With the rapidly plummeting tourism and remittance flows, and with none of us knowing when once again travel can resume safely, I'm sure I do not need to paint the picture to you. Add to this the disruption of global supply chains, shrinking ODA, major loss of foreign investment, and challenges related to debt servicing. We have a near perfect storm. The bottom line is a severely constrained fiscal space to both respond to COVID-19 and to build back better, including in the face of increasing frequency and devastating extreme weather events. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the time is now to extend targeted and effective support to the SIDS. Innovative and bold changes are needed, changes that can boost resilience to exogenous shocks, including COVID-19, and help build more diversified economies. To achieve that, through partnerships, genuine international support, notably from multilateral organizations and bilateral partners, must step in now. Significant technical and financial resources, including new and innovative financial instruments, are needed. SIDS need immediate and effective commitment for long-term debt relief and restructuring. A key driver has to be the building of resilience, including resilience to respond to climate change and extreme natural events. In its response to the pandemic, the United Nations has prioritized the most vulnerable countries, and they include the SIDS. What we can see so far is that the socio-economic responses at national and regional levels have aided in boosting health systems. Social protection measures have ensured to a degree that people's needs for basic services are met, especially the most vulnerable groups in society, such as women, children, the elderly, and those with disabilities. Economic interventions have supported the informal sector, workers, small and medium-sized businesses. Everything must be done so that the hard-won gains are preserved and that people can see a future to look forward to post-crisis. Many of the responses have been based on multilateral collaboration to ensure macroeconomic stability and support for financing decisions. Efforts are made to improve resilience and capacity building so that societies may emerge greener, digital, and more resilient to future shocks. At the global level, OHR LLS supports these efforts. Beyond our advocacy role, we focus on strengthening coherence in the United Nations response to the crisis. We have established a SIDS national focal point mechanism, which has become a critical force in steering the focus and efforts of the United Nations to deliver targeted support and policy advice in the implementation of the Samoa Pathway and the Sustainable Development Goals. We recently held virtual meetings for the 3 SIDS regional groups, the Caribbean, Pacific, and the Atlantic and Indian Ocean and South China Sea ACE region. These meetings have allowed our national focal points to remain engaged at a time when the sharing of information, lessons learned, and best practices are perhaps more important than ever. They have also reminded us that country nuances matter and that we must respond to these unique needs. There is no one size fits all. A common theme across the focal points meetings was the need to leverage the health crisis to build back better. SIDS know that the crisis beyond its threats is the opportunity to diversify narrow or single sector economies and move away from the resilience on fossil fuels. SIDS know they must advance new sectors such as renewable energy, digital infrastructure, and they must give greater prioritization to investment in green and blue economies. But SIDS need the fiscal space to make these things happen. They need fiscal liquidity and they need concrete solutions to address their immediate and longer-term debt challenges. They need tailored partnerships in a number of areas, including the development of statistical systems to better plan, monitor, and evaluate the implementation of their sustainable development goals. OHR LLS continues to advocate for and promote partnerships in SIDS on these issues. On access to concessionary financing, we are engaged in a number of work streams. We work with the international financial institutions and the G20. We are engaged with the World Bank Group to review access to IDA and IBRD resources on an exceptional basis. We know how vitally important it is to expand access to concessionary financing and existing emergency financing instruments to meet the considerable needs of SIDS during this crisis and beyond. OHR LLS, in close partnership with other UN agencies, also works on the development of a multi-dimensional vulnerability index. We see this as crucial to redefine eligibility to concessionary financing. We are committed to bring this important policy tool as fast as we can to member states for their consideration. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me turn to the debt issue. The United Nations Secretary General has initiated a broad financing for development process together with Jamaica and Canada. The objective is to present an ambitious menu of policy options to heads of state and government. The policy options are to help countries recover from the current crisis in the short term, mobilize the financial resources to achieve the SDGs, as well as to build the resilience and the sustainability of countries and the global financial architecture over the medium to long term. In this context, OHR LLS together with AOSIS organized a special discussion on debt risks in SIDS. The outcome of the discussions fed into the menu of options that was presented to Ministers of Finance this morning and then heads of state and government later this month. We will follow up with a special high-level meeting on SIDS debt sustainability early next month to bring much needed attention to the needs of the SIDS. This will be particularly be the case in the lead up to the fall meetings of the IMF and the World Bank Group. With respect to partnerships, we continue to promote outreach with the private sector, including through our SIDS Global Business Network. The biannual forum of the GBN will take place later this year in Palau in the margins of our Oceans Conference. You all know the saying how island states are big ocean nations. We really must drive home the importance of the ocean as a cross-cutting sector for sustainable development in SIDS. The recovery from COVID-19, the 2026 GBN will focus on ocean partnerships to enhance resilience across a range of areas, including ocean energy and the use of marine resources, as well as sustainable and diversified tourism. Further information on the forum will be available on our new website, www.un.org/OHRLLS in due course. Incidentally, we hope that you will find the website to be an important resource of information on events, reports, and activities carried out by my office. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, I thank the organizers for holding such an important and exciting summit, and I look forward to listening to you and learning from your insights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. We do actually have some questions coming in right now for both the High Commissioner as well as the Prime Minister. Our first question, and this will go to Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves. How does the pandemic and the resulting financial impact on budgets of nations and territories across small island developing states that are getting hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic impact the necessary focus on climate change, which is also a pressing, although more long-term problem for the region?
Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines. We share one currency. We have seen wide variations in economic impact as a consequence of COVID on the revenues and on economic growth. In the case of the more heavily tourism-dependent economies, like Antigua and St. Lucia, you have revenues fall between 1/3 and 50% compared to last year. In a case like St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which is less tourism-dependent, you have revenues falling marginally, and you will have economic growth in St. Vincent and the Grenadines falling by about 5% for the year thus far. But in other countries in the currency union, as much as 20%, which is 1/5, is a serious decline. Of course, it has to do in part too, not only with the structure of the economy, but how we responded to COVID. In the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we did not lock down, we did not close down, we didn't have any state of emergency and the like. Other countries and the planes closed down on us, but we didn't close down on them. And what we did, we used a lot of good old-fashioned boots on the ground epidemiology, testing, contact tracing. We imposed restrictions of various kinds, but nevertheless left some space so that we can balance much better lives and livelihoods. Because from the very beginning, we saw, from the moment the pandemic struck, from the time we had our first case in St. Vincent and Grenadines on March the 11th, we said, look, this is an enormous challenge with 4 dimensions: health, economic, social, including education, and of course, security. And we did these things, we conducted ourselves in a way that we kept these things in tandem, because there's some countries which said, look, this thing is essentially a health problem. If you did that, you're more likely to overreact. There's a serious problem we are facing, but we didn't get hysterical in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So I think the structure of the economies and how you responded, in part, have something to do with the extent of the fall in revenues and also the extent of economic decline. Government revenues I'm talking about, and the extent of the broad economic decline. Now we are in a particularly challenging period because this season, this hurricane season, is an above average active one. So far, we haven't had any big hurricane like we had in 2017 when you had 2 hurricanes, 2017, 2018, 2 hurricanes category 5. We haven't had that, but we have had adverse climate change. We have had a lot of rainfall, and we have had problems with landslides, erosion of the sea, the coastal erosion, problems with river defenses, and so on and so forth. And these things, you reach a certain level where the impact cumulatively, I mean, in the case of St. Vincent and Grenadines, between 2010 and 2018, we didn't have any hurricane of category 4 or 5. We had smaller weather events, but cumulatively over that period, it's over 75% of GDP. Now, I mean, could you imagine a 5-year period just because of climate change, just because of the hurricanes, the adverse weather patterns? You're down about 75% of your GDP because all the knock-on effects. So it's a real challenge in going forward, both with the COVID and all the other historical issues, contemporary issues we talk about, COVID, and then of course the onrush in hurricane season. We're in the middle of it, and we had to put aside resources for resilience, for supporting families and the like. It's a big problem, and that is why partnerships are so important, both with the public and private sector, to build this resilience and to achieve the sustainable development goals.
Thank you, sir. I want to give the High Representative an opportunity to answer that question related to budgets, its impact on overall development for small island developing states, as well as how that might impact the fight against climate change.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And of course, the member states, the small island developing countries have had to focus on dealing with the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, which is more than a health crisis. It's an economic crisis, a humanitarian crisis, a security crisis, and a human rights crisis. And this has highly highlighted the severe fragilities and inequalities within and amongst nations. And coming out of this crisis, we require a whole of society, whole of government, and whole of the world approach driven by compassion and solidarity. From the United Nations perspective, the Secretary General has launched a UN comprehensive response to COVID-19. And this response sets up what we can and must do to deliver on the global response that leaves no one behind, reduce our vulnerability to future pandemics, and build resilience to future shocks, above all climate change, and overcome the severe and systemic inequalities exposed by the pandemic. Because dealing with the pandemic does not the existing challenges that the SIDS have had to deal with did not go away. It's still very very relevant. So there has to be some balancing out. The impact on budgets, of course, has been is quite severe, even though a few of the Pacific countries have not had any cases, but because they've closed their borders, the tourism revenue has been lost. So a lot of the revenue has been lost by the SIDS. And I think because they're small island developing states, the impact of these shocks is felt a lot more than in bigger economies as well. So, you know, there is a lot of support that's coming out from at a multilateral level and as well as at a bilateral level to help the small island developing states to cope with the impact of COVID-19, but as well as not losing sight of the targets with regards to the Sustainable Development Goals as well as the Samoa pathway. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question relates to tourism. And for those that don't know, St. Vincent and the Grenadines is actually experiencing a transformation in their tourism industry since they opened their international airport just a few years ago. And already we're seeing multiple new resorts coming on, or announced and are coming online shortly in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. But with that said, how do we view what's happening with the COVID environment and the changes in travel patterns in the tourism industry writ large? How do we see the rebirth of tourism happening in St. Vincent, but elsewhere throughout the Caribbean? And what are governments doing to prepare for this rebirth of tourism? And what will tourism look like in the coming years? So I'll turn it over to the Prime Minister first.
Encouraged by the response from the private sector, regional, international, and domestic, showing great confidence in the future of tourism. At the moment, we have in excess of $300 million worth of big tourism investments in the following hotels. One by a Canadian investor, the Black Sands at Peters Hope. The state sector involving with the Republic of China at Mount Twin with a Marriott. In the case of the Sandals beaches at Mohamed. We have at Ratamil another group of investors out of the United States, a $60 million US Royal Mill Hotel, and there's the Holiday Inn Express at Diamond. And in Katoa, we are having Soho House, which, as you know, is a big name globally. Now, with all of this, there's tremendous, you're going to add about 1,200 rooms, 1,100, 1,200 rooms of high quality to the existing hotel stock. And in a small country, that's a big number. Employing in construction, thousands of people. So over the next 6 months, as that builds out. And then, of course, in 2.5 years' time when they're operational, which everybody expects that we'll come back we learn to live well with COVID. We will have, hopefully by then, a vaccine which slows the virus and so on and so forth. So there's a great deal of hope still that the tourism sector would remain viable. You've gone in a dump now. Then we're beginning to hear about the green shoots coming up in relation to cruise tourism and the like. However, we have to make sure that the local linkages, and we're putting a lot of resources into these, the farmers are doing so and the fisher folk, in relation to the farming and fishery sector, or the marine sector, because they are what going to feed the hotels, the visitors who come in the hotels, and to raise fishermen's income, fishermen and fisherwomen income, and also to raise the incomes of farmers. So I think that is, you see, what has happened is this, as you had rightly said in the introduction, over the last 20 years, we have had to restructure the economy in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, moving from a goods-based economy to a service-based one, which tourism is essential. You can't have a tourism-based economy without you having international airports and jet airports, which we have built, without having an education revolution, which we have put in place. So the strategic path in building a modern, competitive, many-sided post-colonial economy, which is at once national, regional, and global, those things are, that strategic path is working. It's only that we're having a terrible hiccup at the time of COVID, and we have to hold things together and do not lose our nerve. And it is clear that the investors are not losing their nerve. They're staying there with us, and we're building out.
Thank you, Prime Minister Gonsalves. I want to give Fekita, the High Representative, the opportunity to answer the question regarding tourism. And then I will introduce President Ali, who has just joined us for his remarks.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think, you know, tourism and the aviation industry have been the most hard hit by the COVID, and you know, and that's been impacted by the decisions of individual countries to close their borders and setting up you know, regulations with regards to quarantine requirements, which has really prohibited people from traveling, and for tourism itself. So you know, I think once a vaccine has been developed and made available, there will be an increased sense of security of travel, because right now, you know, even if people wanted to travel on tourism, they're not able to because of the not only the availability of the flights, but also the border restrictions and the quarantine requirements. Because you know, for most countries, they're putting a quarantine requirement of 2 weeks in isolation, so people will not, you know, travel. And then if you transit through other countries, you might end up spending many weeks in following quarantine requirements. So I think there has to be a real coordinated global response to bringing tourism back, and then also a lot of support at a regional and also at a national level. But for SIDS countries, the tourism sector is, for some economies, even contribute up to 70% of their GDP. So it's really important that all efforts be focused on how to rebuild the tourism industry again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, High Representative. It is now my distinct honor to introduce His Excellency Mohamed Irfaan Ali, President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. Democracy is fragile. Over 5 tumultuous months, President Irfaan Ali, Vice President Barak Jagdeo, and a group of brave Guyanese called the Defenders of Democracy stood strong for the Constitution, free and fair elections, and the rule of law. The Guyanese story of the last 5 months fighting for democracy gives all of us hope. Hope that when they work together, legal institutions, civil society organizations, the international community, and the people, democracy can survive. From humble beginnings, President Ali was born on the island of Laguan in the Essequibo River and raised in the community of Lenora on the west bank of the Demerara. Growing up, he did not know that his calling would be to not only to serve his nation, but also to defend his democracy. I will close my introduction with the words of the great Guyanese statesman, former President Cheddi Jagan, who once said, and I quote, "The people are indestructible. You may beat them, gag them, detain them, imprison them, shoot, and toll the bell for them. But they will rise again, not mysteriously, but inevitably." Ladies and gentlemen, I humbly and respectfully introduce a true champion for democracy, President Irfaan Ali. President Ali, can you hear us? Wonder if we're having some technical difficulties.
Yeah. Yes. Hello.
Oh,
Hello?
yes. Yes, sir.
Were you hearing me, or I need to repeat?
Yes, please begin. Start again. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. First of all, I was expressing my gratitude for your very kind words of introduction, and to say to the Honourable Prime Minister Gonsalves and all the leaders of CARICOM who played also an important and integral role in ensuring that democracy was not only sustained, but at the end of the day, the will of the people was respected in Guyana. And that shows the
It is appearing that we're having a bit more of a technical difficulty here.
Yeah. So I think you lost me at some point there. I was saying that the struggles and the sacrifices over the last 5 months were not only borne by the leaders here in Guyana, but that the role the Honourable Gonsalves as chair as member of CARICOM and then chair of CARICOM, Prime Minister Mohamed, and all the regional leaders played reinforces the essential attributes of CARICOM, of which many small island states make up CARICOM. And it shows the value of us coming together and the value of cohesive action and concentrated action. And those are some of the challenges we face individually today as small island states, and here in CARICOM especially, where if we are to address issues only from an individual country perspective or island perspective, then we may not get the But what is required is for us to have collective action in addressing the many issues. Collective action in addressing, I think our internet is unstable.
It's cool. It blipped for a second, but it's back, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So it shows the value of us having collective action, the value of forums like these that bring together various policymakers, leaders from different organizations, technically competent people as we strive to have a common agenda, a common understanding of problems and issues, as we develop common approaches that would advance the cause of all our islands and countries. We are too small to fight and to sometimes represent that interest individually. But when we approach issues in a collective manner, and COVID-19 is an excellent example, that we have to work in a collective manner and approach the pandemic in a collective manner for us to get the best possible results. So I want to thank you for inviting me to share some thoughts at this forum. I am pleased to participate in this Virtual Island Summit 2020. It provides small states, especially small island states, with a platform for the exchange of experiences in the progression towards the Sustainable Development Goals. The summit also gives voice to the special needs of these small island states. My country, the Republic of Guyana, is not an island. It is located on the northern shoulder of the South American continent, and it is the only English-speaking country on the continent. But it is also a member of the constellation of small island states, which along with the Republic of Suriname, another continental state, comprise the Caribbean community known as CARICOM. Despite not being an island state, Guyana shares many of the vulnerabilities of small island states. It is susceptible to the effects of climate change, natural disasters, and exogenous economic shocks. The country is also handicapped by its small internal market and issues of social and economic inequalities. The Sustainable Development Goal Agenda. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development recognizes the constraints which small island developing states face. This is affirmed by the United Nations General Assembly, which acknowledges, and I quote, that small island developing states remain a special case for sustainable development in view of their unique and particular vulnerabilities, end of quote. Of course, these vulnerabilities has only been exacerbated as a result of COVID-19. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development provides a framework to ensure that economic transformation results in social transformation. And this is very important, not only having economic growth, but having that economic growth linked to social transformation, political transformation, and improvement of the welfare of people in our country. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals promulgated under the agenda are a litmus test of the extent to which economic development, in view of their unique, I think it came off, are a litmus test of the extent to which economic development corresponds with human development. And this is another important issue that we have to face, ensuring that our economic development corresponds with human development. And human development here takes into consideration issues of healthcare, education, social justice, access to infrastructure, water, and all of these things. Guyana has begun the process of aligning the SDGs into its development agenda. We remain wedded in these goals as part of our national development agenda. My remarks today revolve around the experience of my country in implementing the SDGs. I will also address two issues which can potentially detract from the SDGs. I refer specifically to the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic and climate change. The United Nations adopted 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in 2015. The agenda is a plan of action which reflects the international community's determination to undertake bold and transformative steps, which are urgently needed to shift the world onto a sustainable and resilient path. And this is very important for us as small island states and small countries, ensuring that the development path is sustainable and resilient, resilient to external shocks, resilient to internal shocks, resilient in relation to the issues of climate change. We have pursued a low carbon development strategy pathway, and I would love for the opportunity to share the essential aspects of the strategy with the strategy has tremendous goodwill. For a matter of fact, we had one of the largest carbon credit market globally some years ago. I wish today to share the critical lessons and key challenges which have been identified in and articulated in Guyana's first voluntary national review of July 2019. The review was intended to track Guyana's progression in the implementation of the SDGs. Among the critical lessons learned thus far are: 1, the vital importance of strong data systems in promoting development and to ensure strategic and evidence-based interventions. The continued need to build institutional capacity to ensure effective implementation of policies and projects and to deliver vital services to our population. Thirdly, the ongoing need for collaboration between stakeholders to ensure sustainability and the achievement of development initiatives. And this is where forums like these are very, very key and important in promoting more collaboration, in sharing best practices, sharing experiences, so that we can learn from each other. Among the key challenges identified were: 1, limited financing, especially given the country's narrow tax base; human resource constraints, which can hinder institutional strengthening and limit capacities for science, technology, and innovation required for economic diversification and productivity improvement; and inadequate data to support planning, policy formulation, and targeted interventions. My government intends to boost the country's data system so as to ensure that policies, planning, and implementation and targeted interventions are evidence-based. We will undertake a systematic analysis of our data management system, including data collection and analysis, throughout the public service to identify critical areas of strengthening. Now, we would all agree that data is one of the key missing elements that sometimes create difficulties in planning and projection for small island states, for countries like ours. That is why it is extremely critical for us to develop our capacity in terms of data generation, analysis, and interpretation, and to have policy decisions and policy directions that are data-driven and evidence-based driven, and not only ad hoc. It is for this reason too that we need to have national development strategy that strides electoral period, so that investors, investment, the population, they all are aware of a 10 to 15 year strategic plan for the country. That strategic plan must have political buy-in by all the stakeholders so that we can have a plan that is embraced nationally. Institutional capacity, therefore, remains a constraint to national development and to the achievement of the SDGs. As the voluntary national review notes, the country still faces a lack of institutional capacity to implement a larger portfolio. And this could include deficiencies in various phases of a program or project cycle, as well as bottlenecks in institutional mechanisms, such as procurement and human resource management. Guyana's ability to access financing is hindered due to insufficient capacity as many donors requires countries to undergo intensive process before granting funding, and restricting Guyana's ability to prepare the necessary proposals. Now, one of the challenges that we have had is as our country developed, there is a push from multilateral organizations and funding agencies to also push the country into different status, from low income to developing to developed. Now, whilst this might sound attractive to policymakers and leaders, there are implications, because we're starting from a different start point, and access to concessional financing becomes an issue. Access to grant resources becomes an issue. So these are some of the things that has to be addressed for small island states, because when we have an injection in capital and the economy starts to grow and development starts to take place, then you're graduated up the ladder, and then access to concessional financing and grant facilities becomes a hindrance to further development. Guyana will continue to strengthen its institutional capacity at government agencies so as to allow them to better regulate our sectors and to deliver government programs, especially those relating to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. It is beyond the scope of this presentation to examine individually the lessons and key challenges associated with Guyana's implementations of the SDG. However, I wish to make reference to the first 4 goals. Goal 1 aims to end poverty in all of its forms. Guyana has made significant progress in reducing poverty, particularly between 1993 and 2006. We believe that poverty continued to be reduced in the ensuing years. However, data constraints prevent us from conclusively determining whether the Millennium Development Goals in relation to poverty has been fully realized. We remain committed, however, to ending poverty in all its forms, especially extreme poverty. This will require a rebalancing of national expenditure to ensure equitable and even-handed development. Goal 2 aims to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Despite the recent commencement of petroleum production, Guyana will not neglect its agricultural sector. We will strengthen and diversify this sector with a view to realizing the SDG ambition of promoting sustainable agriculture. Guyana is already food secure in 6 food groups, namely meat, legumes, vegetable, fruits, fats and oils, and staples. We have the potential to contribute to CARICOM food security. And this is one of the main agenda of the government in the next 5 years. Not only to expand agriculture, but to make food production more competitive and to have access to the CARICOM market. One of the problems of small developing countries and island states is that sometimes we adopt standards that are inhibitive to facilitate trade among ourselves. Sometimes we ourselves implement barriers that does not facilitate trade among ourselves and help to grow our individual economy and contribute to each other's development. And these are barriers that we must address, especially at the level of CARICOM. Goal 3 aims to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. My government intends to pursue the realization of this goal by policies which include expanding primary health care and preventative medicine, upgrading and equipping health centers and hospitals, increasing the range of specialist health services, incentivizing private health services, and improving conditions of service and remuneration for health workers. The focus will be on improving citizens' health and well-being. Now, this is very important, ensuring that government not only invests in public health care, but that government can support private health care. 1, to reduce the cost, and 2, to improve the level of service and to make healthcare accessible to all the people of our country. Goal 4 aims to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities. Education outcomes across our 10 administrative regions remain uneven. It will be a priority of my administration to address this unevenness. We'll work to ensure that every child eventually has equal access to inclusive and quality education. In keeping with the Sustainable Development Goal, we intend to propel this process, including through the use of information communication technology in education. Our plan is not only to satisfy our local education requirements and demands, but also to create a framework in which we can make education and health services export earners for our country by incentives, by creating an enabling environment, and by supporting institutions here in Guyana. As small island states, I have provided a synopsis of the general approach which my government intends to take in mainstreaming the SDGs into public policy in the fields of education, health, food security, and educational diversification and poverty reduction. We view the SDGs as an important tool in helping us achieve our own national development objectives. We believe that this is true for all small island states. As small island states continue to confront extant threats and challenges, they cannot afford to be detoured from the path of the SDGs. Unfortunately, the global coronavirus pandemic and climate change threatens to divert attention away from the SDGs and to reshape global, regional, and national priorities. The coronavirus pandemic is the greatest health threat to face the world in 100 years. It has the potential to derail progress made in pursuit of the SDGs. This must not happen. The pandemic has forged forms of global cooperation which, if replicated in respect to the SDGs, can unlock greater support for sustainable development in small island states. And that is why forums like these are so critical. For us to come up with a common agenda, given the impact of coronavirus pandemic, that we can promote collectively to international funding agencies, to international financial institutions, to support our economies and support our policies and programs in achieving the SDGs so that we do not go backwards but continue to push forward in relation to the SDGs. Here in the Western Hemisphere, the Caribbean Community and the Forum for the Progress and Integration of South America, PROSUR, have been discussing and forging cooperation in combating the pandemic. Guyana has responded swiftly and decisively to the pandemic. I have engaged national stakeholders, including the private sector, trade unions, youths, communities, and healthcare professionals, in crafting a national holistic COVID-19 response plan. The plan involves safety measures and social restrictions to suppress and contain the spread of the virus, increased testing, improved testing capabilities and quicker results, the standardization and improvement of treatment protocols, mobilization and distribution of relief to affected households and individuals and vulnerable groups, measures to reboot the economy and support particularly small and medium-sized enterprises, measures to strengthen the resilience of the country's financial sector and enhance immigration and border controls and the repatriation of our nationals stranded overseas. Confronting the pandemic remains the most immediate and important priority presently, facing small states. But even as small states focus on suppressing the pandemic, they must not ignore other existential threat as climate crisis. Climate change is real. Its effect can be devastating on small island states. Rising sea levels can force the disappearance of many small island states. It can do irreparable harm to their tourism infrastructure. Natural disasters inflict damage, destruction, and loss of lives. It can retard development and force a regression from the pursuit of SDGs. Guyana, through its low-carbon development strategy, has demonstrated what a small state can embark on, and that is an ambitious plan, but realize a path of forging a low deforestation, low carbon economy in which national development and combating climate change becomes compatible objectives. And this is where we have to shape the discussion globally to ensure that national development priorities, global priorities, become compatible with the priorities that are necessitated by climate change and other environmental issues. Guyana, along with the Kingdom of Norway, entered into a partnership to provide the world with a relevant, replicable model of how REDD+, the mechanism for reducing emission from deforestation and forest degradation, can align the development objectives of forest countries with the need to combat climate change. Guyana subsequently developed a Green State Development Strategy, Vision 2040. However, the Low Carbon Development Strategy captures a more comprehensive and holistic approach not only to issues of the environment and climate change, but livelihood issues, community development issues, and sustainable development. Guyana's leadership is combating climate change crisis is fully consistent with the SDG 13, which calls for urgent action to combat climate change and its effects. Guyana will continue to provide environmental services generated by our standing forests to the rest of the world, even as we take steps to mitigate the effects of climate change. Small states are passive victims of climate change. They're taking bold and ambitious actions to combat one of the world's foremost threats. Small states are playing their part in helping the world to overcome these threats, such as the global coronavirus pandemic and the climate crisis. Small states, including small island states, are building health resilience, protecting their population, and helping to suppress the global spread of the disease. They're contributing to mitigating the effects of greenhouse gas emissions which trigger climate change, and these measures are fully consistent with their commitment to the SDGs. The Virgin Islands Summit 2020 provides an opportunity for greater recognition to be accorded to the contribution which small states are making to addressing global challenges. It is an opportunity also to highlight their special and differential needs to forging ahead with the implementation of the SDGs. As we confront two of the world's greatest threats, the coronavirus pandemic and the climate crisis, let us not lose sight that the SDGs represent an instrument to ensure not only development, but our very survival. I thank you very much for your patience and time in listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Ali. We were giving a virtual round of applause, given the reality of a virtual summit. We do have one question that we would like to go to, and that is, how will Guyana's energy industry transformation be carefully managed to benefit the people, but also to ensure that it can be done in an environmentally sustainable way in support of low carbon development strategies?
Well, first of all, the Guyana oil and gas, the new oil and gas industry has been given a lot of international spotlight. But in our development agenda, we have made it very clear that oil and gas is only but one plank of our development strategy. The resources from oil and gas must be used to ensure we expand agriculture, to make agriculture not only sustainable, but competitive, to ensure that we bridge the inequality gap, to ensure that we enhance the productive sector so that the traditional economy and new areas of economic development, which include the knowledge economy, information and communication technology, healthcare and education as export services. These are some of the new areas of the economy. Tourism also, we're going to put a lot of investment that will be supported from resources from the oil and gas sector. So we are building an economy for the future that is not dependent on oil and gas. That is the first thing. The second thing is in relation to the management of the sector itself. We have made very clear that the sector must be managed by technically competent people and that the political arm must have an arm's length relationship in relation to the management of the sector. That is why we're now reviewing the Natural Resource Fund, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, legislation that govern these funds to go to Parliament so that it will have, it will reflect national priorities. It will be managed in accordance with EITI measures of transparency and accountability. And these are the things that are important for the industry. Transparency, accountability, ensuring that the resources are used for the building of the economy, whilst at the same time securing resources for future generations. We also are cognizant of our role in CARICOM, for example, and that we will have a responsibility also to ensure Guyana plays a greater role in supporting improved conditions of living and supporting other states within CARICOM.
On behalf of all of the organizers of the Virtual Island Summit and the thousands of people that are joining us here from all over the world, we'd like to once again thank President Ali for his time and his remarks today. If there was applause, I'm sure it would be given now, but you know, that is the reality of today's world. So thank you very much once again, President Ali.
Thank you very much, and if you wish, I can have my staff share with you Guyana's low carbon development strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, and we will post that. Our next speaker is Helen Royer. She's the Director of Human Development for the Caribbean Community, CARICOM. Ms. Royer assumed the position in the Directorate of Human and Social Development on 1 July 2019. Prior to her appointment, Ms. Royer, a national of the Commonwealth of Dominica, early in her career served in the field of nursing in varied capacities as a primary care nurse, registered nurse midwife, community health nurse, and senior community health nurse, maternal and child health coordinator. During that period, she also served as a senior community health nurse, was instrumental in reviewing the guidelines for primary healthcare directives for Dominica, and also the maternal and child health manual. She later assumed the position of National Coordinator of Health Promotion, focal point for chronic non-communicable diseases, and was successful in developing and receiving approval for Public Servant Wellness Program. She was also instrumental in working on the response to disasters and other public health threats in Dominica. From 2011 to 2019, Ms. Royer worked as the permanent secretary within 3 ministries, namely the Ministry of Health and Environment, the Ministry of Social Services, Family and Gender Affairs, and the Ministry of Ecclesiastical Affairs, Family and Gender Affairs of the Government of Dominica. As permanent secretary, Mrs. Royer participated in several national and regional consultations on public health issues, environment, sustainable development, and social development, and was instrumental in both the development of guidelines and implementations of various policies. She has served on several boards and committees as chairperson of the National Solid Waste Board, chairperson of the National Non-Communicable Diseases, member of the Dominica Nursing Council, the chair of the Oversight Committee of for CDB funded project for under the Basic Needs Trust Fund, among others. Mrs. Royer also served as a member of the Technical Working Group for Carfilin, CARPA Public Health Laboratory Network, and worked extensively with PAHO on the development of policies and strategies for non-communicable and communicable diseases in Dominica. In her current capacity as director, she has represented the CARICOM Secretariat at various fora and currently oversees the Environment Sustainable Program. Mrs. Royer.
His Excellency, Dr. the Honourable Ralph Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Chair of the Caribbean Community. His Excellency, Dr. the Honourable Mohamed Irfaan Ali, President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, other distinguished speakers, honourable ministers, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I bring greetings on behalf of the Secretary General of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, Ambassador Erwin Larocque, who unfortunately had other commitments and was not able to participate in this panel. First and most appropriately, I wish to express sympathies and solidarity to all individuals, families, and countries who have suffered losses due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The world is still struggling, responding and recovering to various degrees as we speak in this virtual forum, so our hearts are with them. The reality for small island development state SIDS is that we find ourselves constantly in a state of coping, responding to, and adapting to threats and disruptors of our economic and social development. We have peculiar geographical and structural issues that leaves us inherently vulnerable to exogenous shocks, be they pandemic, climate impacts, geopolitical issues, or trade disputes. Whatever events are reverberating regionally and globally, chances are that seeds have contributed little to it, but are experiencing inexplicable severe impacts. As we emerge from our collective lockdowns, the global community may understand a bit more our sense of isolation and overwhelming of global systems that leaves us disadvantaged as seeds on the road to recovery. The other more lasting and recurring reality is that we begin this virtual forum in the month of September, which increasingly every year is a time of anxiety for families, businesses, and governments across the region when the hurricane season reaches its peak activity. You may be interested to know that the first week of September 2020 has unfortunate record of having a named storm begin with N for the first time in the history of the Atlantic. Just as I read the news of this unwanted record as Tropical Storm Nana developed, Tropical Storm Omar quickly followed within hours. We expect September to be busy in an already record-breaking year. These troubles loom in the psyche of Caribbean citizens every year, affecting our ability to plan and implement improvements at both the individual level and macro level. Excellencies and esteemed participants, this virtual island summit and other similar fora must continue to harness this constant coping and adaptive capacity that is our normal and use it as a locus for development planning. The need for innovation and sustainability in all aspects of development is becoming more urgent if we are to improve our lives and livelihoods in a fundamental and sustained way. Our reality as SIDS necessitates that we will be constantly and relentlessly tried and will need to swiftly and safely return to normalcy, each time stronger and more prepared than the last. It also goes without saying that this cycle puts small island development states in jeopardy of achieving the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. In CARICOM, a wide stakeholdership is working to collaboratively articulate a resilience development agenda where our sectoral development plans and initiatives will have to coalesce around the necessity to be agile and adaptable in bouncing back from adversities. So this is a number of key strategies that have to be undertaken. Firstly, we must embrace continuity planning at all levels. Households, small businesses, other sectors, and social services must all carefully plan and consider key financial, operational, and logistical changes that can be made to allow for quick and smooth recovery. Secondly, digital development must be given priority, particularly in commercial sectors and in education. CARICOM has been beautifully laying the groundwork for a single ICT space as part of our integration strategy. Thirdly, we must mainstream and elevate sustainable use and management of ecosystems and their services. This must be buttressed with the strengthening of national statistical systems to especially produce key environmental statistics and accounting. Fourthly, we must conduct risk financing and assessments using a plethora of scenarios across multiple hazards. Scenario planning for hurricanes, oil spills, and pandemic influenza are commonplace. Assessment of multiple hazards and ripple effect across sectors will help build resilience. And finally, we must invest substantially in our resource efficiency and self-sufficiency. This is an important requirement in greening economies, but the prolonged closure of borders has reinforced the need. These and other resilience enabling initiatives must become the linchpins of national and regional strategic frameworks upon which productive and social sectors are advanced. Truthfully, the Global Seeds Development Agenda, most recently refined and agreed in Samoa, has always been a resilience agenda since its articulation in Barbados in 1994. It fully recognizes our vulnerabilities and tailors a development pathway to suit our unique circumstances. The increased frequency and severity of global shocks, both stochastic and predictable, have underscored the urgency for achieving the SDGs through the Samoa pathway. Ladies and gentlemen, a resilience agenda should always seek to influence the international narrative. Our relentless pursuit of higher climate ambition will continue, as will our cause for increased equity in financing for development. These have been common quests for all our seats, the cause being made more urgent with every passing crisis. The bolstering solidarity of the Placencia Ambition Forum, spearheaded by the government of Belize as chair of the Alliance of Small Island States, OASIS, is testament to this. For the peak of the pandemic, OASIS rallied to remind the world that COVID-19 recovery cannot be achieved in the absence of an ambitious Paris Agreement. The world was reminded that with or without COVID-19, the future of island states hinged on ambitious commitment to a greener, cleaner future by all. As many of you may be aware, 2020 is earmarked to be the year that the international community articulates the new post-2020 global biodiversity framework. In addition to the climate crisis, there is a less discussed extinction crisis that could face us if we do not address biodiversity and ecosystem loss. Governments and stakeholders the world over must reinvent and restore the relationship between human beings and nature, their interdependence and benefits, and reverse biodiversity loss by addressing its drivers, such as unsustainable consumption and production. Even during this pandemic, we should be making efforts to increase environmental efforts such as reforestation, ecosystem restoration, and the establishment of national parks and green spaces to help mitigate the impacts of global climate change and protect our natural resources. This summit, which was brave and important enough to go on during this upheaval period, will have no shortage of experiences to share as we navigate these difficult times and craft new ways to provide products and services. It is my wish that practitioners in the region and from all over the world can fully engage over the next few days. Ideas and partnerships arising from the summit will surely contribute to the post-COVID agenda. In closing, all that is left for me to do is to express my sincere thanks to you, all the sponsors, organizers, and volunteers working to make this a success. Likewise, a sincere thank you in advance to all participants' candid and purposeful engagements. I wish this summit every success. Thank you.
Thank you once again, Mrs. Royer, for your comments. And we will give you a virtual round of applause, as is apt for these COVID times. So thank you so very much for your comments. Our next and final speaker is Anil Srivastava, Chief Executive of Leclanché, a global green technology public company headquartered in Switzerland. Anil is a highly successful and experienced executive with a strong track record of building global businesses. His quarter-century experience spans the clean energy, digital technology, and telecommunications markets. He joined Leclanché in June 2014 and has engineered a turnaround of the 100-plus-year-old battery manufacturer into a top-tier provider of energy storage solutions. Today, Anil represents the commercial sector in our opening event, and he comes to speak about sustainability as a corporate responsibility and part of doing business. This from a company that helped to build Ellen, the world's largest 100% electric ferry. The company that is partnering with Bombardier to roll out next generation battery-powered locomotives, and a firm selected by Toyota to help build a fleet of fuel cells and battery-powered trucks. May I introduce Anil Srivastava.
Thank you, Matt. Distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, my 10 minutes with you will be very different from other speakers because I'm going to share with you an industrial perspective. If you would allow me, I'll share my screen to kind of, support my speech. Give me a few seconds, please. Matt, is my screen seen?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Right.
Anil, if you could just put it into presentation mode, that would be great. Thank you.
Is this better now?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me use my allocated 10 minutes to share a very different perspective, which is industrial perspective. Having said that, what I heard from Honourable Prime Minister Gonsalves, Honourable President Ali, and other speakers, the core of our discussion has been about two things, COVID and sustainable development. I will touch upon that from an industrial perspective. I begin with our President, Emmanuel Macron. I don't think anybody would have put better and more directly and bluntly that we all live on one Mother Earth, and it is a big island called Earth. There is no planet B. We have to focus, continue to take actions in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This is despite the challenging time we are living. It is clear, it is absolutely clear that we have to focus on saving lives and livelihood. Beyond that, we have to continue to focus on a bigger crisis we have been living with, which is sustainability or the climate challenge. I see purely from an industrial economic perspective, this as an opportunity of a generation or generations to charter a new course. As we go from take economic recovery actions, how about we put the climate challenge at the center of it? How about we rebuild infrastructures which are climate resilient, if you will? An example, how do we produce materials for building homes, roads? What is the new transport industry? What should be the structure of new transport industry? What should be new electrical generation, transmission, distribution? And how do we heat those buildings? How do we cool those buildings? If we put climate challenge at the center of economic recovery, ladies and gentlemen, it is my humble but firm view, we might be unleashing Industrial Revolution 2. It's easier said than done, but it's time for action. I say that from a corporate perspective, we all hear glossy corporate reports we read, big commitment for investments. I would humbly say, hopefully not displeasing some people, that it is important to focus on current actions, current technology, as much as we will invest in a technology which may be mature in 2030 and commercially viable, God knows, a couple of years after that. So we have to take action now with what we got, and we can make a significant impact on that. I would share some of the experience my company has in terms of what we are doing, our bit to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Here is an example of electrification of marine vessels. In Leclanché, I say with humility but utmost pride at the same time, we are among the world leader in building lithium cells, which are a combination of very high energy density and a very long life cycle. That is optimal when you want to do electrification of marine vessels and fleet ground vessels. On this chart, you see e-ferry. This is LN electric ferry, which went into operation August of 2019, is world's largest electric ferry in operation. We built it for our customer in Denmark to make it a point that electrification can be done today and it's economically viable. Subsequently, we are delivering a number of marine vessels electrification, a cargo liner for a fertilizer company in Norway called Leclanché, luxury liners for Grimaldi lines in Italy and in the Mediterranean, Vasa lines in Finland, and through Damen, a Dutch partner, we are delivering all electric vessels for operating on Ontario Lake, Canada. It is possible, ladies and gentlemen, to carry out electrification of marine vessels today. I would give you some examples of that. First and foremost, in Europe, we are contributing our bit in reducing 138 million tons of CO2 emissions. It may be small compared to automotive industry, but let's take actions now as opposed to think that the world will change for 10 years from now. We can start changing the world progressively today. And here are some concrete examples of that. If you look at the chart in front of you, close to 80% of all ferry routes in Nordic countries, Northern Europe, can be all electric. That number is 70% in European Economic Area. I'm sure it is not very dissimilar in other parts of the world. This is an action we can take now, here and now, as opposed to thinking that when the world will change in 2030, we will take actions. Time for action is here and now. Let me talk a little bit more on transport, this time around fleet vehicles, fleet ground vehicles. I'll first speak about the buses, which is quite obvious. China has taken the lead in the world in terms of electric buses. In rest of the world, no matter where you are, I think we are laggards. With all due respect, I include myself, my country, France, into that. There's no reason why buses can't be electric in all big cities, in all islands in the world. They are competitive today. Oftentimes, I've heard that trucks cannot be electric. That is yes and no. I think it's more yes than no. Combine hydrogen fuel cells with batteries, you can operate trucks for long distance. I want to take a little bit deep dive into trains because all of us have this perception that trains are green. Probably to an extent, yes. In Switzerland, if you're living where I am, our train system is almost 100% electric. Having said that, that isn't the case in many countries in the world. I want to take an example of Germany, one of the largest industrial country in the world. 40% of the railway network in Germany is not electric. That's the bad news. The good news is 66% of that non-electric road is under 70 kilometers. The current battery technology can completely address that. There's no reason why the railway network in Germany cannot be almost all electric. Same applies for rest of the world. And I believe same applies for rest of many, many countries in the world for that matter. In Europe for sure. So I hope you see an example of what we can do today, as opposed to saying, let the technology be perfect, sometime in future, then we will act. No, we can act now. Other topic which is often discussed is renewable energy. It is true that a lot of renewable energy is being produced worldwide. If we ask the follow-on question, how much of it is actually being used? When renewable energy is being produced, there is no demand and it is wasted. The technical term we use in the industry is curtailment. So we run it to the ground. When renewable energy is coming too much in the grid, it destabilizes. We have technology solutions today which are economically viable. I want to demonstrate that through a few of the examples of the projects Leclanché, my company, has done. We have delivered a number of projects to stabilize grid ancillary services in Germany, in United States, in Canada, in the Netherlands, and so on and so forth. Two projects I would like to particularly highlight here is number one, Graciosa is a small island in called Graciosa in Azores in Portugal. Very, very small island. We have built a power plant, green power plant, combining wind and solar. More than 60% of electricity of this island is green. As we speak, the project is in operation. Further, I would like to begin by thanking the government of St. Kitts and Nevis for awarding a project to us, wherein we are going to build possibly largest solar plus storage project in the Caribbean. When built, as soon as COVID-19 related delays are taken out, when built in about 12 months from today, 30% of electricity in the island of St. Kitts will be green electricity. We can do this today. Our own experience, I can confirm to you that 80% of power generation in islands can be decarbonized with the current technology competitively without looking for government's grants and so on and so forth. We can act today, not wait for something which may happen 10 years from today. So in trying to wrap up my short speech here, oftentimes we have been told electrification of transport, be it the buses, trucks, trains, or cars. Well, garbage in, garbage out, sorry for using a spoken word for you, they don't use green electricity. I agree with that. There's no reason why electrification of transport system cannot be married completely with using green electrons, green electricity. There are a number of technologies available today. If you recall, I just mentioned to you that how much of renewable energy is generated and wasted. There are technologies called power to gas and gas to power. If we use that to create clean fuels, clean hydrogen, we can clearly use the hydrogen to charge these electric buses, trains, trucks, cars, and all of the above. So from an industrial perspective, just to conclude from my side, it is possible to take concrete, viable, economically viable actions today to make an impact while we continue to focus on the next generation technology, invest in that, but don't hide behind the technology will be perfect 10 years from now. The time for action is here and now. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much for your remarks. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. The first is, what is the biggest impediment you see the electrification of ferries and shipping in islands around the world, and the ones that you see represented here, which is a diversity of islands from all over the world with various different situations?
I think impediments can be discussed in two parts. One part is on the technology side, which I think I commented, and second is on financing side, to be very clear. Okay, if you are doing a new build, the business case is obvious. Okay, but if you are doing a retrofit, you have to really go into engineering and see, is there an economic case to retrofit an existing dirty fuel, sorry for the language, dirty fuel engines and convert them into all electric. So case by case it varies, but what is important to say that if we are looking at financing options, I include island into that. So long as ferries are running, okay, it is entirely possible to finance that on the basis of what we call within Leclanché mobility purchase agreement. We, Leclanché, can facilitate, okay, likewise, I'm sure other companies can do, where we can economically sign a contract wherein which we charge euros, francs, dollars per kilometer per nautical mile traveled. So it is possible to finance energy as a service as long as we know the certainty of the runtime of the marine vessels.
Great. Our next question is, how does Leclanché work with governments? Specifically, I know you touched a bit on this, but how do you think private and public sector collaborations could happen better? I know that there's a lot of difficulties in setting up public-private partnerships, but from your perspective, what do you think are some of, when they work well, what does that look like?
I think from a public partnership, public-private partnership, it is a must. We no longer can have universe where policymakers decide what they decide and private enterprise do what they do. If we have to be successful, we have to make sure that we are partnering with the government. I'll give specific examples. I'll kind of relate again to what we are doing with the government of St. Kitts. We invested initially in studying the electricity network, the demand, load, etc. of the network, and say that this is what we can do to the government of St. Kitts. Took quite some time to obviously go through the process of education, and ultimately we signed a 20-year power purchase agreement, which we have made public. I'm very thankful to the government of St. Kitts, Prime Minister Timothy Harris and others, Minister in Patches, who was very instrumental in this particular project. Once government was educated, they could see the business case that their total cost of electricity generation is reducing and it is green. We were able to sign the PPA. There is a process of education which private enterprise need to invest. We did the same thing with the e-ferry project, which was, by the way, funded by European Union and Danish government. We designed the entire concept of an all-electric ferry funded by European Union and Danish company from concept all the way to putting into operation in August 2019. I believe that we have a responsibility in the corporate sector to make that investment, to educate the policymakers, and once they get it, they will go for it. At least that's my belief.
What are your thoughts on engaging and educating the community about the benefits of the various solutions that you offer? How do you go about doing that, and how do you go about engaging community stakeholders so that they understand the importance of making this kind of investment?
I think local participation is absolutely key. I can only let me give live example of our project in Denmark. It is the local mayor who sponsored the project in the end. Yes, we did the work in European Union. We did the work with the central government in Denmark. In the end, it was getting the sponsorship from the local mayor, involving local people to train them. Engineers came on board from nearby islands, say, okay, this is going to be the world's largest electric ferry. We are going to be part of it. So local participation has been key for the success in Denmark. I believe it is always key. whenever we will break new grounds.
And how do you make it, especially for very small islands? You know, there are a number of islands around the world that have 200, 300 persons living on them. How do you go about developing a solution that you know, can make financial sense for these very micro islands that might be part of a larger state, or you know, just have their own small grid?
Honestly, that is an easier bit without meaning to reduce the complexity. Okay, depending on the natural resources available, it is easy. Graciosa has a population of 5,000, which is locally resident. And then in tourism season, more people come in. Okay, if we can make Graciosa Island today 60+% renewable, the next step would be for us to, frankly, go to 100% renewable. These small islands have an opportunity to leapfrog, okay, completely to 100% renewables, 100% green. Okay, and with the diesel gensets going off, all the import and other hassles you do is an amazing saving. I would encourage all participants in the call to go and look at the customer's website, not what Leclanché is saying, what they have achieved through this project in Graciosa. And that will be, I believe, a good reference point for all small islands.
And how do you work with others in the energy ecosystem? You know, you obviously have generation, distribution partners that you work with. How does that, you know, functionally work? And when it works well, how does that look like when you're working with other partners at various parts of the energy creation and distribution ecosystem? Right.
Clearly, there are many stakeholders. Leclanché alone is a small company relative to the word need. But it is a partnership. Somebody has to take the lead. Okay. In the case of building green power plants, microgrids, the brain of the power plant is a software called energy management software. Since Leclanché owns that, we tend to design the green power plant. We tend to look at the demand response, load balancing side of it, involve power systems people, such as Siemens ABB, involve wind turbine people, involve solar people, but we undertake basically the software development and management of the grid through our software. But it is a partnership, as you said.
So one person asked, electric ferries are, you know, currently slightly more expensive than your traditional fuel-powered ferries. How do you see this changing over time? And, you know, obviously battery technology seems to be, you know, getting better and better, and you all are leading the way on that. So when do you think that there's going to be this equilibrium met with that the electric ferries and other trains and whatnot are going to become, you know, more economically viable?
First of all, I think economic viable needs to be done in two parts: the capital expenses and total cost of ownership. If you take in capital expenses, an all electric ferry would be slightly in the range of 10 to 15% more expensive than a traditional one today. But when you take total cost of ownership, including saving of the fuel, the maintenance, etc., the payback period, this is customer saying, not Leclanché, the payback period for electric ferry in Denmark is between 3 to 4 years. No ferry is designed for less than 25 years of life. So calculate your number. So it is already competitive from a total cost of ownership perspective. The second question on battery technology follows the first one, frankly. One thing I would like to clear the misnomer for everybody: the batteries which go in car are not the batteries which will go in fleet vehicles. The attribute of what is called cycle time, how many times you can charge and discharge, is very different. For a passenger car, you need 500 to 700 cycles for a 7-year life. And for a ferry, you need 4,500 cycles. That is the lithium cell technology Leclanché designs. It's a very different battery technology underpinning electrification of fleet vehicles, marine vessels, than passenger cars.
We are about to hit a hard stop, so I want to thank you very much for your remarks, and also, you know, encourage everybody to log into Pathable and connect with Leclanché, with BuzzMaker, and with all the various other participants that are here. And let's have a great conference. And I will also have to put in a shameless plug for tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. My panel, Democracy in the Islands, Political Issue and Public Affairs Campaigns, will be live at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. So thank you once again to all the participants, the Prime Minister, the President, the various dignitaries, as well as Mr. Srivastava for their important comments. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great conference.
Thank you. Thank you. Best wishes.